him a hands-on executive. And now he's got a firm grasp on one of this country's oldest institutions, New Zealand Rail. Ed Burkhardt has steered Wisconsin Central Rail from being a relative newcomer on the American scene to becoming an international player. So what's his track record, and what can we expect from him here? Rod Vaughan reports.
It's 8 o'clock on a frosty Christchurch morning. The Southerner is about to leave for Invercargill. On board, a full complement of passengers. Few take any notice of the American talking to the engine driver. Just another tourist, or so it seems.
Yeah, I'm Ed Burkhardt. Nice to meet you. I took your trip a couple of weeks ago. Oh, yeah. Down all the way to Invercargill, and it's a beautiful ride. We liked it enough that we figured we'd see if we could buy this place.
And to buy New Zealand Rail is just what the gregarious Mr. Burkhardt did. He's the president of Wisconsin Central Rail, the American railroad company that's just bought New Zealand Rail for $400 million. The deal will effectively double the size of his ever-expanding company. A company that runs freight trains over 3,000 kilometers of track in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ontario. An area bounded by the Great Lakes and known for its dairy and timber industry, a little like New Zealand. Wisconsin Central is a newcomer to the rail scene. The company was only established 6 years ago, but since then it's won a reputation as the best regional railroad in North America. And that accolade came from a respected railway magazine. A magazine whose sentiments are shared by railway writer Dave Ingalls of Wisconsin.
Wisconsin Central has a great reputation among railroaders and among customers. Wisconsin Central is the shining star of the regional railroad movement, which began about a decade ago as some of the larger systems sought to get rid of their more marginal properties. Wisconsin Central, or WC as we call it locally, has done a splendid job, just splendid.
But why is it held in such high regard?
They provide service to the customer. They're cognizant of the customer, they're cognizant of their employees and the relationship they have with both key elements in a service business.
And it's become successful against all the odds, because for years the line had been in decline and decay. Its former owner, the Soo Line, struggling to make ends meet. But Ed Burkhardt saw an opportunity and grabbed it. He and some friends bought out part of the Soo Line and formed Wisconsin Central. The early days were tough, as Eastern Division manager Ed Tibell remembers only too well. Everyone, including Ed Burkhardt, was expected to turn their hand to anything and everything.
During our startup, Mr. Burkhardt was headquartered in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. He was working the midnight shift, the worst shift, and he was out operating trains, and the employees have never forgotten that. And he still likes to dabble a little bit, and that's what he expects all of his management to do, too, to help in any way it needs to make the operation run.
What sort of a man is Ed Burkhardt?
He's a team player, and he feels everybody pulls an equal share in the company, I'd say.
And that policy is actively enforced. All employees are expected to be extremely versatile. Demarcation is a dirty word round here. Locomotive engineer Scott Packer is a case in point.
I started at the WC 5.5 years ago, and I started out as a clerk working in the office, and in 5 years I've changed my job 5 times, and now I'm a locomotive engineer.
You can double as something else if necessary?
Oh yeah, I work as a conductor, I work as a switchman, work as a brakeman on a train. I do anything. Whenever there's an opening, we take it. We like to move ahead.
The first year's operations weren't encouraging. The company turned in a loss of about $4 million. But since then, it's been in the black, recording a net profit of more than $20 million last year. Along the way, staff numbers have doubled from 500 to more than 1,000, as Mechanical Superintendent Terry Corson explains.
So we took people that were working at piecemeal rates, $5 an hour, things like that. We brought them into the Wisconsin Central. We paid them a $15.50 starting rate, which is now up to over $1,600 a month starting rate, and offered them some benefits that they never heard of. They have an option to purchase stock, profit sharing, insurance benefits, and everything. So we've made their life a lot better.
And that hasn't gone unnoticed in the state capital of Madison, where Wisconsin Central is regarded as a genuine American success story. The company gets most of its business from primary producers, who are the mainstay of the local economy. Agriculture is big round here, not to mention the timber industry, which makes up 60% of Wisconsin Central's traffic. Traffic that is generated by the staff themselves.
That's, again, one of Mr. Burkhardt's concepts, that you shouldn't have a sales department. Train crews are expected to have contact with the customer and seek out the customer's needs or expectations so we can better serve him to grow our business.
So even a locomotive engineer is expected to be a salesman?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some of our best leads have come from our locomotive engineers and conductors.
And clearly the customers are satisfied if Harry Quadracci is anyone to go by. He owns the largest independently owned printing company in America and relies on Wisconsin Central to deliver his newsprint.
Well, it's head and shoulders above anything you see on railroading in the United States. The only rules they seem to know is getting the job done. They're very smart operators. They're tops in customer service, and they take real great care of not only their clients but their employees.
So clearly, Wisconsin Central is on a roll. And nowhere is this reflected more vividly than in its share price. 2 years ago, when it went public, shares were selling for $16 US each. Today, they've more than doubled in value to $44. Investment expert Chip Parkley is bullish about the company's future.
Their traffic growth in recent quarters has exceeded 10% in unit terms, and their business is doing extremely well. In fact, they're doing better than any other major U.S. railroad, and it's been a long time in this country since we've had railroads delivering over 10% unit growth.
What effect has the New Zealand investment had on their stock price?
The stock is up about $4 a share, which is about 10% from $40 to $44, and that's commensurate with the expected increase in their earnings from the acquisition.
And the person who steered Wisconsin Central to its preeminent position is Ed Burkhardt, the affable and unpretentious chief executive, who travels to his Chicago office every day by commuter train and shuttle bus. Not for him a chauffeur-driven limousine that nearly every top executive in the city seems to have. In fact, Burkhardt's frugality extends to plane travel. He regularly flies to and from New Zealand, economy class.
If you're going to preach economy to your people and expect them to make sacrifices and keep productivity up and serve the customer and all that, you better be willing to do it yourself. That's the way I look at it.
It's a management style which has won him many friends. Talk to employees like Mary Rasmussen, for instance, and you won't hear a bad word said about him.
Just a fair, decent, caring person. He cares about his employees. If we have any kind of a question and we want an answer, we can go right to him with this question. And if we don't get an answer right away, we will get an answer.
He's always accessible.
Very much so, yes.
But not everyone is fulsome in their praise of Ed Burkhardt. Meet Ed Garvey, lawyer and trade union advocate. He's spearheading a drive to get all Wisconsin Central employees signed up as unionists. Currently, the railroad is a non-union company.
Well, you have a president of the company, Ed Burkhardt, who wants to be able to fire anyone he wants to, when he wants to, doesn't want them to have any of the protections under the federal law.
But is there any evidence that the workers are currently being exploited?
Well, they're getting a lot less money than workers on a Class I railroad. The benefits are not as good. And so if exploitation is getting a lot less money with less protection, the answer is yes.
What sort of a person is Ed Burkhardt?
Well, he's pathologically anti-union.
I think what Mr. Garvey really wants is to have employees forced into a union without them voting on the issue. He's pathologically concerned about employees voting on these issues. And Mr. Garvey is not a person that has a history on the Wisconsin Central. He's an outside hired publicist hired by a union that has never had any representation on this railroad.
To date, the unions have made 3 attempts to win over Wisconsin Central employees. But for the moment, it seems they're fighting a losing battle. Everyone we spoke to was adamant that the railroad is a generous employer, while some, like conductor Gary Henson, said they joined the company to get away from unions.
Wisconsin Central is more of a family railroad. You can talk to people. The union, you can't talk to anybody.
What sort of union did you belong to?
The United Transportation Union, UTU. The U took us union.
Why do you say that?
You couldn't trust people in the union. You had to always watch over your back. And I didn't like that. I don't care for that. I like to have people very honest that I can speak to just face to face, and I can do that here.
But Ed Burkhardt and his executives are unlikely to encounter such attitudes at New Zealand Rail. There, these Americans will have 5 unions to contend with, among them the Seafarers Union, whose members help man the Cook Strait ferries. On the face of it, it would seem they're set on a collision course.
I don't see in the land-based unions, New Zealand Rail, an issue where they're holding down the company in terms of productivity or service. There are a few problems with the 3 unions on the car ferries in terms of productivity, and we'll try to deal with those problems.
Which brings us to the question of just what is going to happen to New Zealand Rail, one of the country's oldest institutions. In its heyday, it employed 25,000 people and ran trains over nearly 6,000 kilometres of track. Today, the payroll is down to 5,000 and the track to 4,000. Take away the 1,500 people employed on the ferries and the passenger trains, and you have 3,500 people working for a company which is only slightly larger than its new master, Wisconsin Central, an organisation with only 1,000 employees.
They appear to have a bloated bureaucracy. The general office staff seems to be too large. And again, this is a holdover from government ownership.
So are there going to be cuts in staff numbers?
I think there'll be some cuts in certain areas so far as staffs are concerned. In other areas, they're fine.
Cuts in middle management?
I think there'll be some managerial cuts.
So a number of executive jobs are on the line. But what about New Zealand Rail's passenger services, especially the heavily subsidised commuter lines in Auckland and Wellington? Are they for the chop as well?
I'm told right today that the passenger operation is profitable. It's not very profitable, but it's in black ink rather than red ink, so to speak. And having heard that, I see it as something you want to build on. So as long as, from the railway standpoint, you can look at it as something that's contributing to the company as a whole, you want to improve and increase it rather than eliminate it.
So, for better or worse, Wisconsin Central will almost certainly take New Zealand Rail into the next century. By then, they will have lost their current partner, Fay Rishwhite, who are expected to float their 40% stake in the next 3 to 5 years. However, David Rishwhite is confident that New Zealand Rail could not be in better hands.
I think everybody stands to gain. It's one of those transactions that I really think is a win-win-win. It was win for the New Zealand public when the Crown sold New Zealand Rail. I'd like to think, like every other good transaction, it's a win for the new owners, but in the long run, the New Zealand public will benefit from an improved railway network and operation.
As for Ed Burkhardt, he's going to be a regular visitor to New Zealand for the foreseeable future. And given his style, he's more likely to be found riding engines than riding staff. But clearly, it's been a winning formula for Wisconsin Central. one that may lead to further improvements in New Zealand Rail.
And one of the first things that the new owners of New Zealand Rail say they'll be looking to introduce is a 24-hour Cook Strait ferry service.